Even though they were a people who'd been defeated, a people who'd been brought into captivity, all those things, his testimony from people around him was that they loved him. They just loved him. These wicked people that were in charge of things loved him because he was the most servanthood guy. He did everything that was asked of him, and when he needed something, he came very nicely and asked, and he went to his God, and he did according to the things that God told him to do, and they accepted it because he was shown to be right in everything that he did, right? We talked about that kind of thoroughly, and I think it's very important we understand who Daniel was in that way, because everything else that we're going to be talking about gets a lot of technical things. We'll talk about sort of understanding geography and timelines and stuff like that, which is it's interesting stuff. But you never want to forget that we're talking about a man of God with a life in a covenant with God. And that's who Daniel was. So don't ever let that slip from your mind as we talk about this. See the difference. And what we were, remember, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Now Nebuchadnezzar, at this time, is the king of what we call in secular history the Neo-Babylonian Empire. That's how you'll read it. Neo meaning new. Because there'd been Babylonian empires before. This was a new one. And it's a fairly short-lived one. It basically goes from Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar, to Nebuchadnezzar, to his son, and to his grandson, and it's over. That's it. That's the whole thing, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But he is newly crowned, the king of this empire that his father had begun carving out and then passed over to his son, who then extended it and made it much bigger, and we don't need to know all the details of that at this point. But this is the setting, and this Nebuchadnezzar, king of everything, has a dream. And remember, we talked about the fact that Daniel and his companions basically have just graduated college. They've been under professors and tutors, and they've just graduated. They're out of the Chaldean school. They haven't even got a chance to get their feet wet, and they're going to be killed because the upper guys can't answer the king's question, which is, don't just tell me the interpretation of what I tell you, but tell me what my dream was and the interpretation. And that's it's a pretty big measure. And they're all looking at him going, nobody can do that, king. Nobody does that. No king asks of their wise men to do this. They even say that. No king asks for this because it's just not done. You can't ask for this. Your father would never have asked for this. But he says, no, this is what I need. And Daniel, hearing about it from one who loved him, comes to tell him, they're going to kill you because they're going to kill everybody because they can't answer. And he says, give me some time. And the guy loves him so much, he gives him some time. So he gets Hananiah and Azariah and Mishael to pray, and he goes and prays, and he receives of the Lord the dream and the interpretation. And that's where we are, and it starts this way. Verse 27, Daniel comes to the presence of the king. He answered the presence of the king and says, the secret which the king has demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show to the king. They can't. It's not even fair to, he's agreeing with it. It's not even fair to ask him. But there is a God in heaven that reveals secrets and makes known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. So here comes the dream and the interpretation. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. So what he's saying is, king, you went to bed that night, and you were wondering what's going to come after, okay? Because he's just gone through, his dad just passed away and left him the kingdom. And so he's recognizing, hey, well, what's going to happen after me, and what comes after this, right? So he's asking this. And he that reveals secrets makes known to you what shall come to pass. So Daniel emphasizes it twice. This is not me. This is not some soothsay thing. God in heaven is revealing this to you. But as for me, this secret's not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than anybody else. But for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that you might know the thoughts of your heart. Now listen to that for a moment, because the English is a little bit funny. But for their sakes, that shall make known the interpretation of the king. Who's making known the interpretation of the king? God. So why is it being revealed to Daniel? For the sake of God getting across to Nebuchadnezzar the message he wants to send. That's really why it's happening. That's what he says here. And that you might know the thoughts of your heart. You might know why you were pondering this. Because it's from God that this is happening. And why? Wait a minute. I thought God only dealt with the Jews. Why is he dealing with Nebuchadnezzar like this? I'm telling you, he deals with all people everywhere all the time. Okay? And yes, the Jews had a particular covenant, and the purpose of their covenant was not to keep it to themselves. The purpose of their covenant was to spread it throughout the earth, but they failed in the covenant within a generation. But that's another story. Verse 31, thou, O king, saw, and behold, a great image. So let's put the picture up. Who's running the thing there? Okay. Put the picture up, because there are many of these. You can find, dozens of pictures that represent what we're about to read, but this is as good as any. And this is what he's saying. So you can look at the picture while I read this, and you'll follow along. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible. So the form, this one doesn't come across as so terrible. He just got his arms crossed, kind of standing there. But think of him as being real stern, okay? It's this terrible form. It's like, what's this mean? This image's head was of fine gold, hence it looks gold up there. His breasts and his arms are silver. His belly and his thighs of brass. So you see the brass there. His legs of iron, and it's a little harder to see, but down here, his feet, part iron and part clay. You saw, tell that a stone, now the other picture I had, which I wasn't able to get up here tonight, shows a stone coming and hitting the feet. But just imagine that there's a stone coming in there and hitting the feet, okay? And you saw, tell a stone that was cut out without hands. What does without hands mean? This is a stone that no man made. This is not a man-done thing. Anytime it says it was made without hands, it's talking about God, okay? This is a stone that was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them into pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. So what is that? When you threshed wheat, especially in those old days, you had the wheat, it was all mixed with what's called the chaff. It's like the stalks and the things that hold the wheat kernels. Okay, when you cut it down, it was all that. So you could take it and kind of beat it, and a lot of the kernels would fall off, but you always had this chaff that was mixed in with it. Just various leaves and branches and whatever. And what you would do in the threshing floor is you'd lift it and throw it in the air, and the wind would blow, and the chaff would always blow a little further than the wheat. The wheat would stay and would fall a little closer, and the chaff would blow, and you just do this over and over until the chaff was separated from the wheat, okay? So when it says it became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, it means that the wind just comes and blows it away. What is the chaff good for? You just burn it. It's not good for anything, okay? And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. No place found. I mean, in other words, this brings all the kingdoms of men to an end. I mean, I'm cutting to the chase here. This is late in Daniel, but basically they all come to an end. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. We will tell you the interpretation thereof before the king. So this is what he saw, and so he goes and tells him, Nebuchadnezzar, this is what you saw. So what does that mean? And we could ask that question all day long, but we don't really have to ask, because the next word was, now I will show you the interpretation. Here it comes. Thou, O king, verse 37, art a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. Wow. This guy, he's ruling over something God gave him. I don't want to really go into that yet. Verse 38, wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven has he given into your hand, and has made thee ruler over them all. You, are this head of gold. Nebuchadnezzar, there he is. You are the head of gold. That's what he tells him. So we say that the head of gold represents the kingdom of Babylon. But who is the kingdom of Babylon? Nebuchadnezzar. You are the head of gold. That's what he says to him. Okay? And he says, after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to you. Now he loves to hear that. You know, every king loves to hear that. And another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things. And as iron that breaks all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas you saw the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle or broken. And whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves, who's they? Shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. You don't mix them. And so when you say it's partly iron and partly clay, that it's making a foot, it's making toes, but they're not cleaving to one another. And it says here, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. I'm not going to go into that right now, but just suffice it to say, there's a lot about that, okay? And maybe in the course of some of this, we'll get back to that concept, okay? Verse 44, and in the days of these kings, in the days of what kings? The days of these last kings down here at the bottom of this thing, these toes, and we're going to learn more about that later, okay? In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, an eternal kingdom. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it will stand forever. In other words, these are the kingdoms, the best way to say this, these are the kingdoms of men. The best that men have to offer. The greatest of the kingdoms of men. But it's going to come down to this end times kingdom, and God's going to make himself a king. And it's going to smash the whole thing, destroy it so that it can never be found again, and make a great mountain, and God will be basically all in all, everything's going to be together. Okay? Where was I? Here I am. For as much as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure. So that's the end of his interpretation. So if somebody says to you, what is going on here? Here's what you can say of a surety. That's Nebuchadnezzar. You could extend that to his kingdom of Babylon. That's a kingdom that will come after it, but it's not named at this point. This is a kingdom that will rule over the whole earth. It's not named yet. It comes after it. Then there'll be a fourth kingdom that comes after it. Now we name these. We name them because we read the rest of the book, and we have more knowledge about this. Babylon, Medo-Persia is how we call it. Greece, Rome, which got split into two, right? And then the seventh and eighth kingdoms down here, which are for another day to talk about. That we are very confident of. We know that they're kingdoms, and as we read the rest of Daniel, it'll flesh it out for us, and it will show us exactly what those are, and they are representative of four kingdoms. Now, Jesus, just so we all know, was born, lived, and crucified and rose from the dead under this one. Okay? Somewhere along here. It was farther up, where was he? But the point is it was under the Roman Empire. Okay? Just so you're thinking about it. if you take this guy and you lay him on his side and you draw out, as we've done before, you draw out a timeline. Timeline, the whole idea is this comes first, this comes after, that comes after, right? And you look at this, somewhere from the eternal past, as far back as you get, to the eternal future. So the better way to draw these would be with arrows because they don't end, okay? They go on forever. At this point in time that this is occurring, you know, wherever it is, this is where Babylon is. And what will come after it will be the Medes and the Persians. Medo-Persia, don't worry about reading this, I'm telling you what it says. Babylon, Medo-Persia. Then will come Greece. And in Daniel, we're going to get a lot of detail about those two. Lots of detail. And then after them will come Rome. Rome is founded somewhere back around, you know, it depends on who you believe and how it goes, but we'll just say 650 to 700 BC, somewhere in that realm. So that's 650 years before the time change, right? Jesus is crucified somewhere about 30 AD. So we'll just, for sake of argument, say 700 years from that time until Jesus comes is how that works. That's when Rome was founded. Now, Alexander the Great, which is the Greek kingdom, is actually somewhere around 332. Just say 330 to remember it. 330 BC. So Rome exists long before the Greece thing shows up. Rome existed a long time, but it was just a little city-state. It doesn't become a great empire until after the Greek thing is gone. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. So you guys want to flip up that Roman Empire map one? And maybe that's when you want to flip it over. For people who are watching online, we're just going to put it, so all you're going to see is the map, so you can see it a little more clearly. And I'm not going to point, I'm just going to talk about it. All of you can look at this one. The details of all these words, don't worry, you're not responsible to know all these words. But what you're looking at is you're looking at the Mediterranean Sea. And the Roman Empire basically surrounds the Mediterranean Sea. Now over here, way on this far side, if you're looking at the map on your screen, you're looking at way to the right, you'll see the Caspian Sea over there. That, below it, where you'll see Persian Gulf in the bottom right, and you'll see the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, that's the valley of where the Babylonian Empire is. And when we get to these in more detail, we'll show some maps and things about it. But right now, I just want you to see where we are. This is a geography I really want you to look at and learn. The geography of the Mediterranean Sea. Just think of it as one, it's just a big bathtub, okay? Or a big pool with a spa attached to it, okay? That's how you think of it. And that Black Sea, this is a very important place. It's a big deal how this all works. If you get over here and move over to this little kiddie pool over here on the side, over to the right, the Caspian Sea, when you look over there, right in that area, that's really where, you know, the mountains of Ararat are, where the ark landed. It's probably where Eden was in geography terms, though the world was very different then, so don't get too wrapped up in that. But right in this area, right in that area to the right, is going to be where the Assyrian Empire, we talked about that, and when we talked about the first captivity, you know, how the Assyrians had been before, and then the Babylonians come on the scene. Syrians are up there, Babylonians are there. The Medo-Persians are off the map on the other side to the right. You can see part of them where it says Parthia. In Roman Empire days, that area was called Parthia. Before that, it was called something else. And the Greek Empire comes from Greece. And you can find Greece, Rome's in the middle, in the boot of Italy, and Greece is in this area where all these little islands are. So learn that. This is geography. Every kid should graduate from high school knowing this, of where these things are. Now, it's easy to forget if you don't deal with it all the time. You can switch back, get off the map there, guys. Thank you. But I want you to see this because when we start talking about empires, I want you to know where we're at. Because what I didn't point out, and I'm going to point to it, Jerusalem. It's right there. That's where it is. Right there on the edge of the Roman Empire is Jerusalem. And the timeline that we're beginning and how this works, we're, in the 400s BC is Babylon, Medo-Persians after that, Alexander the Great, 330, it's just the number I remember. It's obviously broader. And then comes the kingdoms after that, which we'll talk about in detail. And then comes the Roman Empire, which had been growing all that time. It becomes dominant after Greece, and its offshoots falls apart. So, these kingdoms of men, what does Nebuchadnezzar see? Greatness. He's going, wow, aren't I special? The kingdom that comes after me is not as good as mine. I'm pretty good. I must be really special, and I'm so happy that God thinks I'm the best. I'm just imagining what he's thinking. Verse 46, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel, and commanded they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. And the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. So what's he testifying? Daniel, your God is the greatest. Now he tries to worship Daniel. We don't hear what Daniel does, but I imagine that Daniel said, don't worship me, it's God. And that's why he then talks about God. Then the king made Daniel a great man, gave him many great gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So now Nebuchadnezzar gets full of himself. Nebuchadnezzar the king makes an image of gold whose height is 60 cubits and the breadth is 6 cubits. So what's a cubit? Cubit is about the length from the tip of your fingers to your elbow, more or less. Okay, it's about that long. So, in my case, it's a couple of feet or something like that. Maybe in somebody's it's even longer, some people's it's shorter. But, people argue about a cubit. Is it 18 inches? Is it 22 inches? What is, I'm not an expert in that argument, but, it's a cubit. So just think about, 60 of these tall, okay? Stack yourself up a whole lot of weight. That's a big statue, okay? It's very tall, very broad. So 6 times as broad as me, and that's saying something, right? That's a wide statue, very tall. Just get the idea what he does. So he sets up this really big thing, and he sets it in the plains of Dura in the province of Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. He's just going to glorify in who he is. Then the princes and the governors and the captains, I'm going to skip some of this stuff just for the sake of time. Nebuchadnezzar set up, they stood before the image, and the herald cried out to you, it is commanded, O people, nations and languages, that at that time you hear the sound of all these instruments and kinds of music, you will fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king set up. And whoso falls not down and worships shall the same hour be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So how'd you like to have that one? This is what you're going to do. Look, all you have to do when the music plays, bow down, worship the image, everything's cool. Don't worship the image, we throw you in a fiery furnace. That's pretty radical. I don't think any of us ever been in a situation quite like that. We get yelled at, spit at, called names or whatever. It might be the worst of it. But it's fiery furnace. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of all the things and all the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up, wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They were very jealous of the Jews, I would imagine. These guys had stepped in and taken over all their places because he made Daniel number 1. Daniel made the other 3, his sub guys. And the Chaldeans come near. These guys whose Daniel saved their life, remember, the king was going to kill them all? So they come to the king and start pointing at the Jews, accusing the Jews, right? They spake to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that hears these sounds should fall down and worship the golden image, and whoso falls not down and worships, he should be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded you. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. And Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury. Now what has he forgotten? He's already forgotten what God did for him through Daniel. It's the only reason these guys got set up as governors and princes is because of what God did through Daniel. And he's just totally forgotten it. And he's mad, and he spake to them, is it true, you three guys, did you not serve my gods nor worship the golden image? Now if you be ready, that at what time you hear the music, I'm giving you another chance, fall down and worship. But if you don't worship, you'll be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. This is not a hard one for us. We're not struggling with how to say this. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, even if he doesn't deliver us, be it known unto thee, O king, we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you set up. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed. He's now radically mad against them. Therefore he spake and commanded they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. Get that thing roaring hot. He commanded the most mighty men in his army to bind them, cast them in the fiery furnace. Verse 21, these men were bound in their coats, their hose, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew the men that took them in and threw them in. I mean, that's pretty brutal. I'd like to be that guy. I worship the image, and you're making me throw them in, and I get burned up. That's not, how's that fair? Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, this happens. These 3 men fell down, bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished. I don't know how he saw, I don't know how it was all built, but he could see in it. And he rose up in haste and spake and said to his counselors, did not we cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? Wasn't it 3? It was 3, right? It was 3 guys. Got it. They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. It's true, there were 3. And he answered and said to them, well, lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Whoa. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth, come thither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. They came out. And the princes, governors, captains, all those people that had been brought to worship the image, they were gathered together and they saw these men. Now notice what's happened here. They all got brought together to worship the image, and what do they end up seeing? They see the Son of God in with 3 guys walking in a fiery furnace and not hurt. That's pretty radical, isn't it? Yeah. So you think, why did God do that? He got to testify of himself before the whole of all the leaders of the realm of Babylon. That's mighty. They all came thinking they're going to worship an image. And Nebuchadnezzar spake, and blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any God except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, language that speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there's no other God that can deliver after this sort. I mean, does God really need that witness? Then the king promoted these 3 guys, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, in the province of Babylon. So we're going to stop there for the moment. So, what do we see about this image that we saw the picture of? God shows him what's going to be hereafter, how it's going to go. Well, why did he show Nebuchadnezzar? I really don't know why he showed Nebuchadnezzar, but Nebuchadnezzar was communing with his own thoughts upon his bed. He was asking, what's going to happen after me? And God answered him. I mean, isn't God wonderful? He answered him and he showed him a thing. But he had to have a man like Daniel to do the job. Because what if Daniel hadn't been there? Or Daniel was feeling sorry for himself because he'd messed up the day before. He'd had a bad day. He yelled at somebody and he felt bad about himself. And, you know, how could God even forgive me anyway? And all kinds of nonsense, looking to himself for something. He never looked to himself. He looked to the God of gods and trusted him, and he worshiped him. And he did it every day. But he was ready and able to be used of God, and he had a relationship with people that allowed him to do it, right? Glorious in what Daniel's life testifies to. And so because he had a man, God was able to testify what he wanted to do. What if God had a man today? What if, say, the President of the United States, whoever he might be or she might be now or in the future, had a man who was like Daniel and started asking, and then God set it up that you brought somebody in. And you might have to go there because he was going to kill you because you wouldn't worship the image. I mean, who knows? But he'll bring you in and you can testify of who God is. So let's put our trust in him. I want to look at something in this. This is, I call it my Catholic Bible because it has in it the, what we commonly call the Old Testament Apocrypha. I've got to find the right place. Oh, there it is. I marked it. Isn't that wonderful? It has in it the Song of the Three. Okay, now, what is the Old Testament Apocrypha? These were books that were included in Latin versions of the Old Testament. And that's why I call it the Catholic Bible, because they use the Latin versions, right? And that's what this actually is. This is the Oxford New English Bible with Apocrypha in it. And I've had this for many, many years. And what it has is an extension of that story. It's got more to it. Now, we can argue it didn't make it into the Bible that we have today, and God's a big enough God to make it all happen. But it is in this, and it's considered inspired in this one. So we don't spend a lot of time quoting it and whatever, but it's just really fun. And so what I want to do is, if you look in chapter 3, verse 23 and 3:24, this is inserted in the middle. And I don't have time to read you the whole thing, but I'm going to hit some highlights of this because it's absolutely wonderful to just get a fuller picture of what's going on, because we think, oh, they got thrown in the fire furnace, then you saw them there walking around. But there's some more. So right after 23, it says this: they walked in the heart of the fire, praising God and blessing the Lord. Notice that their mouths are operating. They're praising God and blessing the Lord. And Azariah stood still among the flames and began to pray aloud, "Blessed art thou, O Lord, the God of our fathers. Your name is worthy of praise and glorious forever. You are just in all your deeds and true in all your works. Straight are your paths, and all thy judgments are just. Just sentence hast thou passed in all that you have brought upon us and upon Jerusalem, the holy city of our fathers. Yes, just sentence thou hast passed upon our sins." So he's making reference to how they ended up there. They ended up there because their kingdom had been destroyed because God cut them off because of the sin of his people. And he's going, you were just, God, in doing such. So let me skip down, because it's just glorious. He goes down, we have no ruler, no prophet, no leader now. There's no burnt offering, no sacrifice, no oblation, no incense, no place to make an offering before thee and find mercy. Because there were offerings for that. Ways that you came to God to receive of God what he gave you. But because we came with contrite heart and humbled spirit, accept us. What does that sound like? It's very New Covenant-ish, you know. What does God say he doesn't despise? He will never cast away a broken spirit and a contrite heart. And they're saying, we came with a humble heart and a broken spirit. He said, well, this is how we came. Please accept us. Because they don't have a place to go offer a sacrifice. They don't have a sacrifice to offer. Could you imagine? Who's your sacrifice? Jesus. I mean, we have the perfect sacrifice already made. But back then, if you wanted to get your sins forgiven, you had to bring a sacrifice, and you had to confess your sins over the sacrifice, and they had to follow all the ritual laws to take that sacrifice so that your sins could be taken away. And these guys are sitting there going, we ain't got a place to sacrifice, but we're coming with a humble heart and a contrite spirit, receive us. Isn't that great? I just think this is great. As though we came with burnt offerings of rams and bullocks and thousands of fat lambs, so let our sacrifice be made before thee this day. This really speaks of New Covenant stuff to me. It's great. Accept our pledge of loyalty to thee. And, he just keeps praying. It's just a wonderful thing. And verse 23 of this thing says, the servants of the king who threw them in kept on feeding the furnace with naphtha, pitch, tow, and faggots. They're throwing wood, they're throwing pitch, they're throwing naphtha, which is like heavily burning stuff, kind of like, think of napalm kind of thing, right? They're throwing this in there. And the flames poured out above it to the height of 75 feet. You ever seen a bonfire that high? That's huge. They spread out and burnt those Chaldeans who were caught near the furnace, but the angel of the Lord came down into the furnace to join Azariah and his companions. He scattered the flames out of the furnace and made the heart of it as if a moist wind were whistling through. Isn't that beautiful? The fire did not touch them at all, and neither hurt nor distressed them. And then it goes in to where they begin to bless the Lord. And you should, this is worth reading. You can probably get on the internet and just search for the Song of the Three and read all this. But it's, blessed art thou, O Lord, the God of our fathers, worthy of praise, highly exalted forever. Blessed art thou in the dome of heaven, worthy to be hymned and glorified forever. Bless the Lord, sun and moon, sing his praise, exalt him forever. Bless the Lord, dews and falling snow, sing his praise and exalt him forever. O earth, bless the Lord, sing his praise, exalt him forever. All men on earth, bless the Lord, sing his praise, exalt him forever. I'm just skipping through. This is very long stuff. Long prayer. They're just praising and praising and praising. For he has rescued us from the grave, from the power of death. He saved us from the furnace of burning flame. He's rescued us from the heart of the fire. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. All who worship the Lord, bless the God of gods, sing his praise, give him thanks, for his mercy endures forever. What a testimony these guys have. It is absolutely glorious. So we have just finished 3 chapters plus of Daniel. And what have we learned? We learned about an image, which we know very little about other than there's kingdoms coming that are going to come hereafter. And we're going to get more detail on that later. But what have we really learned? These people knew how to worship their God. These young men had been brought up in the house of the Lord, and they had took their lessons to heart. Many of the people with them, I'm certain, did not. But they did. And they walked before the people of that time, a very wicked people. I mean, we would have a hard time understanding places where, you didn't do what I said, throw them in the fiery furnace. Later on we read about throw them in a den of lions, let them get eaten. In the Roman times, take those Christians, throw them in the arena, and send a bunch of lions in there and let them eat them. Or whatever it might be that people would do, crucifying people. Because it's such a brutal age, brutal time, that it's just hard for us to imagine how awful that is. You don't know anybody doing stuff like that today. Certainly not around here. Maybe there's parts of the world where people do stuff like that, but I don't think it happens as much even as we think it does. It's a different world. And yet in the midst of that kind of horridness, these guys knew how to put themselves before God, and they had a heart, broken spirit, contrite heart, that worshiped God. And they did it with all their heart. And they weren't afraid of all the things going on around them. They were not moved by all of it. They weren't trying to prove themselves to their fellows. Hey guys, did I do good today? Am I doing all right? How am I doing? What's going on? They weren't constantly trying to live up to earthly things. They did their jobs. Clearly, Daniel's over all of the province of Babylon. He's got his 3 friends. They're over it as sort of sub-guys to him. They had stuff to do every day. They had jobs. They had to work. They had to, make decisions. They had to rule over people, make judgments about things. This was their job. But in the midst of it all, they worshiped God in a spirit of truth before him. And they knew how to praise him. And, we know a little more about Daniel. We'll read more about him later through his entire life, about what he did. I'm sure these 3 did it as well, too, because it is not every day somebody gets thrown into a 75-foot high bonfire and they just have a place that's carved out around them where there's a nice breeze, moist breeze coming through. And they're hanging out. Going, this is great. Isn't this great? Yeah, you guys, this is great. God, is that you? And they're talking to him, I'm sure. That's glorious, because this is the prayer they prayed. They said, Lord, we don't have a sacrifice. We recognize we need one. In other words, be merciful to me. I need you, Lord. Without your sacrifice, I'm nothing. They needed that. I don't have one, but I'm coming with a broken spirit and a contrite heart. And you can get that out of this Song of the Three in more detail, which I just think it's wonderful to say, because it is so new covenant in the way that we talk about these things. David certainly understood it, and that was long before the new covenant. What he said in the same way. So let me summarize a little bit. I just summarized sort of, because when we move on now, it's going to get much more technical as we talk about geography and timelines and and things like that. We're going to spend a lot of time on those things. But these first 3 chapters, besides the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, that Nebuchadnezzar had, you're going to find this also as you read ahead. The dream Nebuchadnezzar had is a dream he has. But most of the rest of the stuff that comes is Daniel asking God. And God showing Daniel. Not showing the king, he's showing Daniel. Okay? And you'll see that because Daniel sees this too. He's going, oh, wow, that's a big old amazing thing. That this mountain's going to come out of the stone carved out without hands and destroy all the kingdoms of the earth and make them as if they never were, in a sense, blow them away like the chaff. And this is going to happen, and he starts asking God more detail. I want to know more. God, show me more, show me more, show me more. He wants to have a greater relationship with God in this stuff. And so he starts going after it. And that's what we're going to be looking at going forward. And we're not going to have a lot of time to spend on the life of these 4 men. But I want you to really emphasize in anything notes you're taking that when you talk about Daniel, you have to talk about who they were in God. And this stuff tells you about that. And it'll make it really much more clear. One of the biggest challenges we face today is we face a doctrine from hell that robs from men true salvation. And we talked about it in New Testament a little bit, just about what Zechariah was talking about. There is a true salvation, salvation from sin, salvation to receive from God His very life. This is the kind of thing that these 3 men understood in a very Old Covenant context. So I wanted you to get that, to emphasize it as many times as I have so that you know it. And I think that's it. Are there any questions about what we've talked about so far? Before next time, we're going to, like I said, we're going to get real technical. Anything else? No questions? Everybody understands? You can all talk about what the statue was. Nebuchadnezzar, the kingdom that comes after, another kingdom rules the whole of the world, comes after, and then another kingdom that's like iron and crushes everything, and then this kingdom that's mixed up with miry clay and iron, and then the rock that comes down, boom, makes a big mountain. There you go. Get to where you know it that well, that you know exactly what it's saying, because that really gives you the timeline, and that we're going to use that timeline to talk about everything we're going to talk about in the rest of Daniel. Praise God. Love you all. We're done.